Tattwananda, who is busy this evening. So I will attempt to do so. Usually when I do this reading as a substitute, I just open to any page and begin my reading. But this time I've actually chosen one section. Let me start with the chant. Tavakatamritam tattva jivanam kavibir iditam kamashapaham shravana mangalam shri madatmatam bhuvi ye burida janaha. O Lord, the stories of your divine acts are an embodiment of the nectar which brings life and hope to the people suffering from the pain of separation. The wise Mahatmas, the devoted poets have all sung its praises. By merely listening to them, it removes all sin and suffering and bestows the supreme bliss and welfare as well. The reciter of the Katha are the large-hearted benefactors and give the utmost to this universe. So the section I've chosen for this evening is chapter 12, the festival at Panahati. This is one of my favorite sections because it gives a beautiful picture of Sri Ramakrishna himself dancing with the devotees. The whole of the gospel is a revelation of how the man of wisdom or the illumined soul or avatar conducts himself, how he teaches. And this is the first book that I read when I came here over 50 years ago now. And the thing that impressed me the most about it is that when you read it, you feel an inner joy, because Sri Ramakrishna was almost always in an advanced state, and he would merge into samadhi as he was teaching. And of course, this was part of his teaching. But you see how he moved around with his devotees, and he went various places. But his whole life, there was so much joy, and that's what you get from this book if you read it. It's Monday, June 18th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna had been invited to the great religious festival at Panahati, near Calcutta. This festival of the flattened rice, which was inaugurated by Ranghunath Das, a disciple of Sri Chaitanya. It's said that Ranghunath used to run away from home and secretly practice his devotions and enjoy the bliss of spiritual ecstasy. One day, Nityananda said to him, "Thief, you run away from home and enjoy the love of God all alone. You hide it from us. I shall punish you today. You must arrange a religious festival and entertain the devotees with flattened rice." Since then, the festival has been annually celebrated at Panahati by the Vaishnavas. Thousands of followers of Sri Chaitanya participate in it. Its chief feature is the singing of the names and glories of God and the dancing of the devotees in religious fervor. The center of the festivity is the temple of Radhakrishna, built on the bank of the Ganges. The master had been invited to the festival by Mani Sen, who was a custodian of the temple. Ram, M, Rakal, Bhavanath, and a few other disciples went with the master in a carriage. On his way to Panahati, Sri Ramakrishna was in a light mood and he joked with the youngsters. But as soon as the carriage reached the place of the festival, the master, to the utter amazement of the devotees, shot into the crowd. He joined the kirtan party of Nadadvip Goswami, Mani Sen's guru, and danced, totally forgetting the world. Every now and then he stood still in samadhi, carefully supported by Navadip Goswami for fear he might fall to the ground. Thousands of devotees were gathered together for the festival. Wherever one looked, there was a forest of human heads. The crowd seemed to become infected by the master's divine fervor and swayed to and fro, chanting the name of God, until the very air seemed to reverberate with it. Drums, cymbals, and other instruments produced melodious sounds. The atmosphere became so intense with spiritual fervor. The devotees felt that Gauranga himself was being manifested in the person of Sri Ramakrishna. Flowers were showered from all sides on his feet and head. The shouting of the name of Hari was heard even at a distance, like the rumbling of an ocean. Sri Ramakrishna entered by turn into all the moods of ecstasy. In deep samadhi, he stood still, his face radiating a divine glow. In the state of partial consciousness, he danced, sometimes gently, and sometimes with the vigor of a lion. Again, regaining consciousness of the world, he sang, himself leading the chorus. Behold, the two brothers have come who weep while chanting Hari's name. The brothers who dance in ecstasy and make the world dance in his name. Behold them, weeping themselves and making the whole world weep as well. The brothers who in return for blows offer to sinners Hari's love. Behold them, drunk with Hari's love, who make the world drunk as well. Behold, the two brothers have come, who once were Kanai and Balai of Braja. They who would steal the butter out of the pots of the gopi maids. Behold, the two have come, who shatter all the rules of caste, embracing everyone as brother, even the outcast shunned by men, who lose themselves in Hari's name, making the whole world mad, who are none other than Hari himself and chant his hallowed name. Behold them, who saved from their sinful ways the ruffians, Jagai and Madhai, they who cannot distinguish between friend and enemy. Behold the two brothers, Gaur and Nitai, who come again to save mankind. The master sang again, see how all Nadia is shaking under the waves of Gauranga's love. The crowd, with the master at its center, surged toward the temple of Radhakrishna. Only a small number could enter. The rest stood outside the portal and jostled with each other to have a look at Sri Ramakrishna. In the mood of intoxication, he began to dance in the courtyard of the shrine. Every now and then, his body stood transfixed in deep samadhi. Hundreds of people gathered round him and shouted the name of God. The thousands outside caught the strain and raised a cry with full-throated voices. The echo traveled over the Ganges, striking a note in the hearts of people on the boats on the holy river, and they too chanted the name of God. When the kirtan was over, Mani Sen took Sri Ramakrishna and Navadvip Goswami into a room and served them refreshments. Afterward, Ram and the other devotees were also served with the prasad. In the afternoon, the master was sitting in Mani Sen's drawing room with the devotees. Navadvip was also near him, Mani offering the carriage hire to Sri Ramakrishna. Pointing to Ram and the others, the master said, "Why should they accept it from you? They earn money." He became engaged in conversation with Navadvip. Master, bhakti matured becomes bhava. Next is Mahabhava, and then Prema, and last of all, the attainment of God. Gauranga experienced the states of Mahabhava and Prema. When Prema is awakened, a devotee completely forgets the world. He also forgets his body, which is so dear to man. Gauranga experienced Prema. He jumped into the ocean thinking it was the Jamuna. The ordinary jiva does not experience Mahabhava or Prema. He only goes as far as Bhava. But Gauranga experienced all three states. Isn't that so? Navadvip: yes, sir, that is true. The inmost state, the semi-conscious state, and the conscious state. Ramakrishna: in the inmost state, he would remain in samadhi, unconscious of the outer world. In the semi-conscious state, he could only dance. In the conscious state, he chanted the name of God. Navadvip introduced his son to the master. The young man was a student of the scriptures. He saluted Sri Ramakrishna. Navadvip: he studies the scriptures at home. Previously, one hardly saw a copy of the Vedas in this country. Max Mueller has translated them so people can now read his books. Master: too much study of the scripture does more harm than good. The important thing is to know the essence of the scriptures. After that, what is the need of books? One should learn the essence and then dive deep in order to realize God. The Divine Mother has revealed to me the essence of Vedanta. It is that Brahman alone is real and the world illusory. The essence of the Gita is what you get by repeating the word 10 times. The word becomes reversed. It is then tagi, which refers to renunciation. The essence of the Gita is, O man, renounce everything and practice spiritual disciplines for the realization of God. Navadvip: but how can we persuade our minds to renounce? Master: you are a Goswami. It is your duty to officiate as priest in the temple. You cannot renounce the world, otherwise who would look after the temple and its services? You have to renounce mentally. It is God himself who has kept you in the world to set an example to men. You may resolve in your mind 1,000 times to renounce the world, but you will not succeed. God has given you such a nature that you must perform your worldly duties. Krishna said to Arjuna, what do you mean you will not fight? By your mere will, can you desist from fighting? Your very nature will make you fight. At the mere mention of Krishna and Arjuna, the master went into samadhi. In a twinkling of an eye, his body became motionless and his eyeballs transfixed, while his breathing could hardly be noticed. At this sudden transformation, Navadvip and his son and other devotees looked at the master in mute wonder. Regaining partial consciousness, he said to Navadvip, Yoga and Bhoga. You Goswamis have both. Now your only duty is to call on God and pray to him sincerely. O God, I do not want the glories of thy world-bewitching Maya. I want thee alone. God dwells in all beings undoubtedly. That being the case, who may be called his devotee? He who dwells in God, who has merged his mind and life and innermost soul in God. The master returned to the sense plane. Referring to his samadhi, he said to Navadvip, some say that this state of mind is a disease. I say to them, how can one become unconscious by thinking of him who is consciousness himself and who has made consciousness in the whole world? Mani Sen said goodbye to the invited Brahmins and Vaishnavas with suitable gifts of money. He offered 5 rupees to Sri Ramakrishna. The latter said that he could not possibly accept any money, but Mani insisted. The master then asked him, in the name of his guru, not to press him. Mani, in a distressed voice, again asked him to accept the offering. Sri Ramakrishna asked M whether he should take the money. The disciple made a vehement protest and said, "No, sir, not by any means." Friends of Mani Sen gave the money to Rakal, requesting him to buy some mangoes and sweets for the master. Sri Ramakrishna said to M, "I have definitely said to Mani that I would not accept the money. I feel free now, but Rakal has accepted it. His is now the responsibility." Sri Ramakrishna, accompanied by the devotees, took a carriage to return to Dakshineswar. They were going to pass the temple garden of Mani Seal on the way. For a long time, the master had been asking M to take him to the reservoir in the garden in order that he might teach him how to meditate on the formless God. There were tame fish in the reservoir. Nobody harmed them. Visitors threw puffed rice and other bits of food in the water, and the big fish came in swarms to eat the food. Fearlessly, the fish swam in the water and sported there joyously. Coming to the reservoir, the master said to him, "Look at the fish. Meditate on the formless God is like swimming joyfully like these fish in the ocean of bliss and consciousness." Monday, June 25th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was at Balaram Bose's house in Calcutta. Rakal and M were seated near him. The master was in ecstasy. He conversed with the devotees in an abstracted mood. Master, let me assure you that a man can realize his inner self through sincere prayer, but to the extent that he has the desire to enjoy worldly objects, his vision of the self becomes obstructed. M, yes, sir, you always ask us to plunge into God. Master joyously, yes, that is it. Let me tell you that the realization of self is possible for all without any exception. M, that is true, sir. But God is the doer. He works through different beings in different ways, according to their capacity to manifest the divine. God gives to some full spiritual consciousness, and others he keeps in ignorance. Master, no, that is not so. One should pray to God with a longing heart. God certainly listens to prayer if it is sincere. There is no doubt about it. A devotee. Yes, sir, there is this I consciousness in us, and therefore we must pray. Master to M. A man should reach the Nitya, the Absolute, by following the trail of the Lila, the relative. It is like reaching the roof by the stairs. After reaching the Absolute, he should climb down to the relative and live on that plane in the company of devotees, charging his mind with the love of God. This is my final and most mature opinion. God has different forms, and he sports in different ways. He sports as Ishvara, Deva, man, and the universe. In every age, he descends to earth in a human form as an incarnation to teach people love and devotion. There is the instance of Chaitanya. One can taste devotion and love of God only through his incarnations. Infinite are the ways of God's play, but what I need is love and devotion. I want only milk. The milk comes through the udder of the cow. The incarnation is the udder. Was Sri Ramakrishna hinting that he was an incarnation of God? Did he suggest that those who saw him saw God? Did he thus speak about himself when speaking of Chaitanya? It was a hot day in June of 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on the steps of the Shiva temples in the temple garden. M arrived with ice and other offerings and sat down on the steps after saluting the master. Master to M. The husband of Mani Malak's granddaughter was here. He read in a book that God could not be said to be quite wise and omniscient. Otherwise, why should there be so much misery in the world? As regards death, it would be much better to kill a man all at once, rather than putting him through a slow torture. Further, the author writes that if he himself were the creator, he would have created a better world. This was a reference to John Stuart Mill's autobiography. M listened to those words in surprise, but he made no comment. Master to M. Can a man ever understand God's ways? I too think of God sometimes as good and sometimes as bad. He has kept us deluded by his great illusion. Sometimes he wakes us up, and sometimes he keeps us unconscious. One moment the ignorance disappears, and the next moment it covers our minds. If you throw a brickbat into the pond covered with moss, you get a glimpse of the water. But a few moments later, the moss comes dancing back and covers the water. One is aware of pleasure and pain, birth and death, disease and grief, as long as one is identified with the body. All these belong to the body alone and not to the soul. After the death of the body, perhaps God carries one to a better place. It is like the birth of a child after the pain of delivery. Attaining self-knowledge, one looks on both pleasure and pain, birth and death, as a dream. How little we know. Can a 1-seer pot hold 10 seers of milk? If ever a salt doll ventured into the ocean to measure its depth, it cannot come back and give us the information. It melts into the water and disappears. At dusk, the evening service began in the different temples. The master was sitting on the small couch in his room, absorbed in contemplation of the Divine Mother. Several devotees were also there. M was going to spend the night with the master. A little later, Sri Ramakrishna began to talk to a devotee privately on the veranda north of his room. He said, "It is good to meditate in the small hours of the morning and at dawn. One should also meditate daily after dusk." He instructed the devotees about meditation on the personal God and on the impersonal reality. After a time, he sat in the semicircular porch west of his room. It was about 9 o'clock. Master, those who come here will certainly have all their doubts removed. What do you say? M. That is true, sir. A boat was moving in the Ganges, far away from the bank. The boatmen began to sing. The sound of his voice floating over the river reached the master's ears, and he went into a spiritual mood. The hair on his body stood on end. He said to him, "Just feel my body." The master was greatly amazed. He thought, the Upanishads describe Brahman as permeating the universe and the ether. Has that Brahman, as sound, touched the master's body? After a time, Sri Ramakrishna began to converse again. "Master, those who come here must have been born with good tendencies. Isn't that true?" M. It is true, sir. Master, Adar must have good tendencies. M. That goes without saying. Master, a guileless man easily realizes God. There are two paths, the path of righteousness and the path of wickedness. One should follow the path of righteousness. M. That is true, sir. If a thread has a single fiber sticking out, it cannot pass through the eye of a needle. Master, if a man finds hair in his food he's chewing, he spits out the entire morsel. M. But you say that a man who has realized God cannot be injured by evil company. A blazing fire burns up even a plantain tree. Saturday, July 14th, 1883. The master arrived at Adar's house in Calcutta. Rakal, M, and other devotees were with the master. Adar had arranged to have the Raja Narayan, a famous singer, and his party recite the Chandi. Raj Narayan began his recital in the worship hall. He sang, "I have surrendered my soul at the fearless feet of the Mother. Am I afraid of death any more?" As the master listened, he became filled with divine fervor and joined the musicians. Now and then he improvised an appropriate line. Suddenly he went into samadhi and stood still. The singer sang again. "Who is the woman yonder that lights the field of battle? Dark her body gleams, darker than even the darkest storm cloud. And from her teeth there flashes the lightning's blinding flames. Disheveled her hair is flying behind her as she rushes about. Undaunted in this war between the gods and the demons, laughing her terrible laugh, she slays the demon Asuras, and with her dazzling flashes, she baits the horror of war. How beautiful on her brow the drops of moisture appear. About her dense black hair the bees are buzzing in swarms. The moon has veiled its face, beholding this sea of beauty. Tell me, who can she be, this sorceress, wonder of wonders? Shiva himself, like a corpse, lies vanquished at her feet. Kamalakanta has guessed who she is with the elephant's gait. She is none other than Kali, mother of the worlds." Sri Ramakrishna was in deep samadhi. Saturday, July 21st, 1883. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Sri Ramakrishna with Ramlal and one or two other devotees started from Dakshineswar for Calcutta in a carriage. As the carriage passed the gate of the Kali temple, they met M coming on foot with 4 mangoes in his hand. The carriage stopped and M saluted the master. Sri Ramakrishna was going to visit some of his devotees in Calcutta. Master, to M with a smile, "Come with us. We are going to Adar's house." M got joyfully into the carriage. Having received an English education, he did not believe in the tendencies inherited from previous births. But he had admitted a few days before that it was on account of Adar's good tendencies from past birth that he showed such great devotion to the Master. Later on, he thought about this subject and had discovered he was not yet completely convinced about the inherited tendencies. He had come to Dakshineswar that day to discuss the matter with Sri Ramakrishna. Master: well, what do you think of Adar? M: he has great yearning for God. Master: Adar too speaks very highly of you. M remained silent a while and then began to speak of past tendencies. M: I haven't much faith in rebirth and inherited tendencies. Will that in any way injure my devotion to God? Master: it is enough to believe that all is possible in God's creation. Never allow the thought to cross your mind that your ideas are the only ones and that those of others are false. Then God will explain everything. What can a man understand of God's activities? The facets of God's creation are infinite. I do not try to understand God's action at all. I have heard that everything is possible in God's creation, and I always bear that in mind. Therefore, I do not give a thought to the world, but meditate on God alone. Once Hanuman was asked, "What day of the lunar month is it?" Hanuman said, "I don't know anything about the day of the month, the position of the moon and stars, or any such thing. I think of Rama alone." Can one ever understand the work of God? He is so near. Still, it is not possible for us to know him. Balarama did not realize that Krishna was God. M: that is true, sir. Master: God has covered all with his Maya. He doesn't let us know anything. Maya is woman in gold. He who puts Maya aside sees God. He can see him. Once, when I was explaining God's action to someone, God suddenly showed me a lake at Kamarpukur. I saw a man removing the green scum and drinking the water. The water was clear as crystal. God revealed to me that Satchidananda is covered by the scum of Maya. He who puts the green scum aside can drink the water. Let me tell you a very secret experience. Once I had entered the wood near the pine grove, and I was sitting there when I had a vision of something like the hidden door of a chamber. I couldn't see the inside of the chamber. I tried to bore a hole in the door with a nail knife, but I didn't succeed. As I bored, the earth fell back into the hole and filled it. Then suddenly I made a very big opening. Uttering these words, the Master remained silent. After a time, he said, "These are very profound words. I feel as if someone were pressing my mouth. I have seen with my own eyes that God dwells even in the sexual organ. I saw him once in the intercourse of a dog and a bitch. The universe is conscious on account of the consciousness of God. Sometimes I feel that this consciousness wiggles about, as it were, even in small fish." The carriage came to the crossing at Shova Bazaar in Calcutta. The Master continued saying, "Sometimes I feel that the universe is saturated with the consciousness of God, as the earth is soaked with water in the rainy season. Well, I see so many visions. but I never feel vain about them. M with a smile, that you should speak of vanity, sir. Master, upon my word, I don't feel vanity even in the slightest degree. M. There once lived a man in Greece, Socrates by name. A voice from the heavens said that he was wise among men. Socrates was amazed at this revelation. He meditated on it a long time in solitude and then realized its significance. He said to his friends, I alone of all the people have understood that I do not know anything. But every man believes he is wise, and in reality, all are ignorant. Master, now and then I think, what is it I know that makes so many people come to me? Vaishnavacharan was a great pundit. He used to say to me, I can find in the scriptures all the things you talk about, but do you know why I come to you? I come to hear them from your mouth. M. All your words tally with the scripture. Navadvip Goswami also said that the other day at the festival at Panahati. You told us that day that by repeating the word Gita a number of times, one reverses it and it becomes Tagi, which refers to renunciation. Renunciation is the essence of the Gita. Navadvip Goswami supported your statement from the grammatical point of view. Master, have you found anyone else resembling me, any pundit or holy man? M. God has created you with his own hands, whereas he made the others by a machine. All others he has created according to law. Master laughing to Ramlal and the devotees. Listen to what he's saying. Sri Ramakrishna laughed for some time and said at last, really and truly, I have no pride. No, not even the slightest bit. M. Knowledge does us good in one respect at least. It makes us feel that we do not know anything, that we are nothing. Master, right you are. I am nothing. I am nobody. Do you believe in English astronomy? M. It is possible to make new discoveries by applying the laws of Western astronomy. Observing the irregular movements of Uranus, the astronomers looked through their telescopes and discovered Neptune shining in the sky. They can also foretell eclipses. Master, yes, that is so. The carriage drove on. They were approaching Adar's house. Sri Ramakrishna said to M, dwell in the truth, and you will certainly realize God. M. You said that the other day at Navadvip Goswami. O God, I want thee. Please do not delude me with thy world bewitching Maya. I want to realize thee. Master, yes, one should be able to say that from one's innermost soul. Sri Ramakrishna arrived at Adar's house and took a seat in the parlor. Ramlal, Adar, M, and the other devotees sat near him. Rakhal was staying with his father in Calcutta. Master to Adar, didn't you let Rakhal know I was coming? Adar, yes, sir, I've sent him word. Finding that the master was eager to see Rakhal, Adar at once sent his carriage to fetch him. Adar had been yearning to see the master that day, but he had not definitely known that Sri Ramakrishna was coming. Adar, you haven't been here for a long time. I prayed to God today that you might come. I even shed tears. The master was pleased and said with a smile, you don't mean that. It was dusk, and the lamps were lighted. Sri Ramakrishna saluted the Divine Mother with folded hands and sat quietly absorbed in meditation. Then he began to chant the names of God in his sweet voice. Govinda, Govinda, Satchidananda, Hari, Hari. Every word he uttered showered nectar on the ears of the devotees. Ramlal sang in praise of Kali, the Divine Mother. Thy name I have heard, O consort of Shiva, is the destroyer of our fear, and on thee I cast my burden. Save me, O kindly Mother. Out of thy womb the world is born, and thou it is that pervades it. Art thou Kali? Art thou Radha? Who can ever rightly say? Mother, in every living creature, thou dost have thy dwelling place. As Kundalini, thou dost live in the lotus of the Muladhara. Above it lies Swahistana, and where the four-petaled lotus blooms. There also thou dost make thy home, O mystic power of Kundalini, in the four petals of that flower, in Braja's 6 petals. At the navel is Manipurna. The blue 10-petaled lotus flower. Through the pathway of the Shushumna, thou dost ascend and enter there. O Lady of the lotus, in lotus blossoms thou dost dwell. Beyond them lies the lake of nectar, in the regions of the heart, where the 12-petaled lotus flower enchants the eye with scarlet flame. When thou dost open it, O Mother, touching it with thy lotus feet, the age-long darkness of the heart instantly scatters at thy sight. Above, in the throat, in the 16-petaled lotus flower of smoky hue, with the petals of this flower lies concealed a subtle space, transcending which one sees at length the universe of space dissolve, and higher yet between the eyebrows blossoms the lotus of the 2 petals, where the mind of man remains a prisoner and past controlling. From this flower the mind desires to watch the sportive play of life. Highest of all, within the head, the soul-enthralling center is, where shines the 1,000-petaled lotus, Mahadeva's dwelling place. Having ascended to his throne, O spouse of Shiva, sit beside him. Thou art the primordial power, O Mother, she whose senses are controlled. The yogis meditate on thee as Uma, great Himalaya's daughter. Thou who art the power of Shiva, put to death my ceaseless craving. Grant that I may never fall again into the ocean of this world. Mother, thou art the primordial power, thou the 5 cosmic principles. Who can ever hope to know thee, who art beyond all principles? Only for thy bhakta's sake dost thou assume thy various forms. But when thy devotees' 5 senses merge in the 5 elements, Mother, it is thyself alone that he beholds as formless truth. As Ramlal sang the lines, above in the throat is the 16-petaled lotus of smoky hue. Within the petals of this flower there lies concealed a subtle space, transcending which one sees at length the universe of space dissolve. The Master said to M, listen. This is known as the vision of Satchidananda, the formless Brahman. The Kundalini rises above the Vishuddha chakra, and it enables one to see everything as Akasha. M, yes, sir. Master, one attains the Absolute by going beyond the universe and its created beings conjured up by Maya, By passing beyond the nada, one goes into samadhi. By repeating Om, one goes beyond the nada and attains samadhi. Adar served Sri Ramakrishna with fruits and sweets. The master left for Jadu Malik's house. Sri Ramakrishna entered the room at Jadu's house where the Divine Mother was worshipped. He stood before the image, which had been decorated with flowers, garlands, and sandal paste, and which radiated a heavenly beauty and splendor. Lights were burning before the pedestal. A priest was seated before the image. The master asked one of the companions to offer a rupee in the shrine, according to the Hindu custom. Sri Ramakrishna stood a long time with folded hands before the blissful image, the devotees standing behind him. Gradually he went into samadhi, his body becoming motionless and his eyes fixed. With a long sigh, he came back to the world of the senses and said, still intoxicated with divine fervor, "Mother, goodbye." But he could not leave the place. He remained standing there. Addressing Ramlal, he said, "Please sing that song, then I shall be all right." Ramlal sang, "O Mother, consort of Shiva, thou hast eluded this world." The master went into the drawing room with the devotees. Every now and then he said, "Mother, please dwell in my heart." Jadu was sitting in the drawing room with his friends. The master sat down, still in an ecstatic mood, and sang, "Mother, ever blissful as thou art, do not deprive thy worthless child of bliss." Finishing the song, he said to Jadak, still in a state of divine fervor, "Well, sir, what shall I sing? Shall I sing, 'Mother, am I thy 8-month child?'" He sang, "Mother, am I thy 8-month child? Thy red eyes cannot frighten me. My riches are thy lotus feet, which Shiva beholds on his breast. But when I seek my heritage, I meet with excuses and delays. A deed of gift I hold in my heart, attested by thy husband Shiva. I shall sue thee if I must, and with a single point will win. If thou dost oppose me, thou wilt learn what sort of mother's son I am. This bitterly contested suit between mother and her son. What sport it is, says Ram Prasad. I shall not cease tormenting thee till thou thyself shall yield the fight and take me in thy arms at last." Coming down to a nearly normal state, the master said, "I shall take some of the Divine Mother's prasad." Then he ate a little of it. Jadu Malik was sitting near him with several friends, among whom were a few of his flatterers. Master with a smile, "Well, why do you keep these buffoons with you?" Jadu with a smile, "Suppose they are, won't you redeem them?" Master smiling, "The water of the Ganga cannot purify a wine jar." Jadu had promised the master that he would arrange a recital of the Chandi in his house. Some time had elapsed, but he had not yet kept his promise. Master, "Well, what about the recital of the Chandi?" Jadu, "I have been busy with many things. I haven't been able to arrange it." Master, "How is that? A man gives you his word and doesn't take it back. The words of a man are like the tusks of an elephant. They come out, but they don't go back. The man must be true to his word. What do you say?" Jadu with a smile, "You are right." Master, "You are a shrewd man. You do things after much calculation. You're like the Brahmin who selects a cow that eats very little, supplies much dung, and gives much milk." Everyone laughs. After a time, he said to Jadu, "Now I understand your nature. It is half warm and half cold. You are devoted to God and also to the world." The master and his devotees were served by Jadu with sweets and fruits, and then the party left. for the home of Kailash Ghosh. I think I'll stop here, but I want to go back to where we began, just so that when you leave, you have that picture of Sri Ramakrishna dancing at the festival of Panahati. It's one of my very favorite parts in the whole gospel, and it is something that you can meditate on. The master had been invited to the festival by Mani Sen, who was the custodian of the temple. Ram, M, Rakal, Bhavanath, and a few other disciples went with the master in a carriage. On his way to Panahati, Sri Ramakrishna was in a light mood and he joked with the youngsters. But as soon as the carriage reached the place of the festival, the master, to the utter amazement of the devotees, shot into the crowd. He joined the kirtan party of Navadvip Goswami, Mani Sen's guru, and danced, totally forgetting the world. Every now and then he stood still in samadhi, carefully supported by the Goswami, for fear he might fall to the ground. Thousands of devotees were gathered together for the festival. Wherever one looked, there was a forest of human heads. The crowd seemed to become infected with the master's divine fervor and swayed to and fro, chanting the names of God until the very air seemed to reverberate with it. Drums, cymbals, and other instruments were producing melodious sounds. The atmosphere became intense with spiritual fervor. The devotees felt that Gauranga himself was being manifested in the person of Sri Ramakrishna. Flowers were showered from all sides on his feet and head, and the shouting of the name of Hari was heard even at a distance, like the rumbling of an ocean. Sri Ramakrishna entered by turns into all the moods of ecstasy. In deep samadhi he stood still, his face radiating a divine glow. In the state of partial consciousness he danced, sometimes gently and sometimes with the vigor of a lion. Again he regained consciousness of the world, and he sang, himself leading the chorus. The crowd, with the master in the center, surged toward the temple of Radha Krishna. Only a small number could enter. The rest stood outside the door and jostled with one another to have a look at Ramakrishna. In the mood of intoxication, he began to dance in the courtyard of the shrine. Every now and then his body stood transfixed in deep samadhi. Hundreds of people around him shouting the name of God, and thousands outside caught the strain and raised the cry with full-throated voices. The echoes traveled over the Ganges, striking a note in the hearts of the people in the boats on the holy river, and they too chanted the name of God. So I'll stop there. In the morning we chant the name of the Lord, and it says, bathing in his name, that bath for weary souls. And when you read the gospel, that's what it's like. You get this whole picture of Sri Ramakrishna, and you can just meditate on that, and it stays with you. It's a very joyful book. It's the best book. So I'll end with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is, from Brahman all, yet is he still the same. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all.